Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to kick off the show with those beautiful lines from Psalm 118 sung by our own Moshe Storch. Let's light up the darkness. He was saying the stone that was despised by the builders has become the cornerstone. How often do we find those reversals in the world? Who's in the house on a Thursday night? Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehuda in South Carolina, Paul in the Great Northwest, Karen in Northern California, Shandora in the Bronx, Melissa in Great Neck, Bell in Florida, Guy in Ohio, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bell in Texas. I'm Yisrael Chai. Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida, Ella in the house, Aoife in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. Our daf. Lots of interesting concepts tonight. Page 105 here in Tractate Bava Kamma, 21st volume of the Talmud. We're working our way through chapter 9, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 5, the robber who stole, swore a false oath that he didn't steal, and then repents, wants to make good. So he has to make restitution, either the thing that he stole or its monetary value, plus a fifth as a penalty. And he'll be liable to bring a guilt offering during times when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. We pick this up near the top of page 105a. Also welcoming, there might be a few folks new to the class tonight. I shared my story, for anyone who hasn't heard it before, the accidental Talmudist story, on our Instagram, which has actually gotten quite a lot of activity in the last few months. So if you're on Instagram, certainly follow us at Accidental Talmudist there. I've been doing all the greatest Jewish jokes of all time, as well as some posts about Israel and Torah. And today, 5-minute version of my story, my origin tale, how I became the Accidental Talmudist. And I know some people are coming over from there, but if you're not on Instagram and following us there, if you're on Instagram, you should follow us there too. Anyway, here we go. The Mishna teaches that if the robbery victim forgave the robber concerning both payments, right, the principal and the fifth, accepting less than the value of one peruta of the principal, so then he need not pursue him in order to return the remaining debt. I mean, this is a small thing indeed. In other words, the robbery victim says, okay, this thing you stole from me, I don't care. The fifth that you also owe on top of that, I don't care. I forgive all of that, except for one iota. One iota of what you took. I don't know, maybe you took a bag of marbles from me, and I forgive you all except this one marble that I liked, the blue marble. If that blue marble is worth less than one peruta, then this additional requirement that we learned in this Mishnah number 5 in chapter 9, does not kick in, right? So in addition to return the principal and the fifth, which is the penalty, Torah imposed, liable to bring a guilt offering, that's not for the benefit of the robbery victim, that's just because this person, the robber, wants to make an atonement. But our Mishnah also added that in order to make amends, right, in order to restore the principal, either the object itself or its monetary value, that the robber is obligated to go present himself personally to the robbery victim, and even if he has to travel, dozens or hundreds of miles to do it, that's what he should do. And the only exception is he can hand the item over to an agent of the court who will make sure it is returned to the victim, or possibly an agent that the robbery victim appoints to receive it in the presence of witnesses. Now, the Mishnah also said that if the victim, forgives all of the debt, but except for some small portion, so that small portion, if it's worth more than one peruta, and a peruta was the smallest coin in Talmudic times, So in other words, if the monetary value was worth less than a penny, it's like there's nothing to forgive. He doesn't have to go return it. But if it's more than a penny, he does, right? So that's what we're talking about. So about this, Rav Papa says, they taught that the robber is not obligated to pursue the robbery victim, right? Meaning to go find him and return it to him personally, only when the stolen item is not extant, right? In other words, the thing that you stole, the actual object, if it still exists, okay, then you can send the monetary value. If the monetary value is less than a peruta, you're excused. But, says Rav Papa, if the stolen item is still extant, he must pursue him to return it, as we are concerned that perhaps the stolen item will appreciate in value. And so even though we can say that this object is worth less than one peruta, that blue marble, well, maybe there's going to be a run on blue marbles at the marketplace, and their value is going to go up beyond one peruta, and then the robber is obligated to return it and return it personally. There are those who say that Rav Papa said the halacha, the law, is not different when the stolen item is extant, and it is not different when the stolen item is not extant. In either case, he does not need to pursue him because we are not concerned that perhaps it will appreciate in value. Worth less than a peruta, don't worry about it. You don't have to worry that it will appreciate later. Now, the Gemara cites another ruling with regard to a stolen item worth less than one peruta. Rava says if one robbed another of 3 bundles of goods that were worth 3 perutos in total, and they appreciated in value, and their value stood at 2 perutot, even if he returned 2 bundles to the robbery victim, he is obligated to return the other bundle. And the Tan of the Mishna also taught, on page 96b, if one robbed another of leavened bread, chametz, and then Passover, Pesach, elapsed over it. So in other words, chametz, leavened bread that belongs to a Jew, and Passover arrives, so that now becomes prohibited, right? Because it was in your possession, and you possessed chametz during Pesach, that bread now becomes prohibited even after Pesach, right? This is why we clean out our homes before Pesach, get all the chametz out, and in case we missed something, we nullify it. And then, sometimes you don't want to throw everything away, so it goes out of your possession because you make a legal arrangement, where you sell all of your leavened products that are in your house, your boxes of cereal, loaves of bread, whatever. You take it out of the house, you put it in the garage or in a sealed closet or something like that, and then you sell it to a non-Jew who could keep it, but usually the arrangement is such that after Passover, he sells it back to you. That way, during Passover, it was not in your possession. Any chametz that is possessed by a Jew and Pesach comes, Passover arrives, it becomes prohibited. Not only during Passover, but even after Passover, right? So about this, the Tana of the Mishnah taught that if one robbed another of chametz, and Passover happened over it, and it is therefore prohibited to derive benefit from it, not only you can't eat it, you can't even derive benefit from it, so then the robber can say to the victim, that which is yours is before you, and he is not required to pay compensation, despite the fact that the robbery victim has suffered a monetary loss. This definitely sounds inequitable. It probably is, but it's just one of those, because the law is the way that it is, the object still exists, it's no longer permitted for benefit, not by the robber, and not even by the robbery victim. He would have had to get rid of the bread, but he could have sold it, right? If he had it before Passover. Now it's worthless, but nevertheless, it exists. So the robber can say, okay, here's the bread that I stole. I'm sorry. I'm giving it back to you. I had it during Passover. It became prohibited, but I'm giving it back to you anyway. It's bread. How much is it worth anyway? But, if it was a store full of bread, it might be something else, a truck full of bread. At any rate, he can give it back, right? Now, what's interesting is if the bread disappears, it was destroyed, it was thrown away, it was shredded, whatever, it no longer exists, then the robber would have to make restitution of what the bread was worth at the time he stole it. So he would have to give money. As opposed to if the bread still exists, he can return that bread, even though it's worthless both to him and to the robbery victim. Now you could say you could give it away to a non-Jew, and I wonder if you can do that. I don't actually know the answer to that because there is something understood to be the benefit of a gift. When you give a gift to somebody, he's grateful to you. That's actually a benefit. And you can't benefit from chametz that Pesach elapsed over it. So I don't know if you can give it away to a non-Jew. But at any rate, what's relevant here is that the robber, now that he regrets that he stole, he can return that which he took, even though neither he nor the robbery victim can benefit from it directly. Now, the Gemara explains the proof from the Mishna. So it may be inferred that the reason he is not required to pay compensation is that the bread is still there in its unadulterated form. But if it is not there in its unadulterated form, even though now it is not worth money, since it was worth money initially at the time of the robbery, he would be required to pay, right, if the bread is not extant. So here too, even though the third bundle is not worth 1 peruta now, since initially it was worth 1 peruta, he is required to pay. Now, Rava raises a dilemma. If one robbed another of 2 bundles of goods that were worth 1 peruta, now we're back to this 1 peruta minimum. If one robbed another of 2 bundles of goods that were worth 1 peruta in total, and he returned one of them to the robbery victim, so then what is the law? Do we say that now that there is no longer a stolen item in the possession of the robber, because the remaining bundle is worth less than 1 peruta, so it's legally understood as nothing, and he has therefore fulfilled his obligation to return the stolen item? Or perhaps we say that since the robber did not return the stolen item that was in his possession in its entirety, he is obligated to return the second bundle. And Rava himself then resolves the dilemma. There is no stolen item here, as the remaining bundle is worth less than 1 peruta. And there is no returning of a stolen item, and there is no returning of a stolen item here. So the Gemara expresses surprise at this expression. If there is no stolen item here, as what remains is insignificant, well, then it follows that there is fulfillment of the mitzvah of returning the stolen item here, and the robber ought to be exempt, as he is no longer considered to be in possession of a stolen item. And the Gemara explains that this is what Rava is saying. Even though the robber is exempt from returning the second bundle, as there is no stolen item in his possession since it's worth less than a peruta, there is nevertheless no fulfillment of the mitzvah of returning a stolen item here, since the returned bundle was worth less than 1 peruta as well. We are literally splitting hairs. We're literally splitting small bundles that are worth less than a penny. Now we're going to start splitting hairs. And this is definitely that kind of situation where what we're doing is testing our understanding of the law, which is very important, right? We're not splitting hairs for the purpose of splitting hairs and showing that we're clever. We're challenging ourselves to understand, and that's why minimum measures are often so important, right? Also, like somebody was recently talking to me about genders in the Talmud. Right? There are more than 2 genders in the Talmud. There's male, there's female, there's tum, in which the sex organs of a person are, not visible because they're covered by skin or not present. And there's the androgyne, or androgynos, in which case the person has the sex organs of both, sometimes called a hermaphrodite. Now, those kinds of literal, physical, intersex, unclear what gender a human being is, how often does that happen in the real world? Very rare. How often does it come up in the Talmud? Quite often. Because it's one of those liminal cases that, really challenge our understanding of the law. So there are things that hardly ever come up in the real world, but do come up very often in the Talmud, because they challenge our comprehension of the law. Now, following Rava's previous dilemma, the Gemara cites a similar dilemma raised by Rava. And Rava says, the sages said that a nazir, right? A nazir is one who takes a vow. He is not obligated. In fact, the sages frown on taking unnecessary vows, but the written Torah provides that a person who wishes to, because they want to elevate themselves spiritually, get a little bit closer to God, take on an extra stringency in their life. No one told them to do it. They're not forced to do it. It's better that they don't do it, but you can do it. Right? And so the vow of a nazir is that for the period of the vow, and if he doesn't specify how long, it's 30 days, he will not consume any products of the grapevine, right? So no wine, no brandy, no grape wine vinegar, etc. No grapes either. And also he won't cut his hair. And he won't make himself impure for the dead, right? Won't come near a corpse, won't enter a cemetery or participate in a funeral. And if he violates his vow, he's going to have to start the counting of days over again. And when his period of Naziris ends, then he has to do certain practices, bring certain offerings. This is why we don't do Naziris in modern times at all, because we don't have the temple standing in Jerusalem, which you need in order to end your Naziris. But at that time, you bring certain offerings and you shave your head. Right? So that's another part of being a Nazir, is that you shave your head at the conclusion of the period of Naziris. So, and Rava says that the sages said that a Nazir who shaved his head as required, but he left 2 hairs uncut. He didn't shave his head completely. He has done nothing, and his obligation to shave his head has not been fulfilled, literally because he missed 2 hairs. So Rava raises a dilemma. If a Nazir shaved and he left 2 hairs, and afterwards he shaved one of those remaining hairs, and the other one fell out of its own accord, so then what is the law? Is this considered shaving one's entire head or not? Has he fulfilled the requirement to shave his head at the end of his period of Naziris? And Rav Ach of Difti said to Ravina, is Rava raising a dilemma as to whether one can shave his head 1 hair by 1 hair, 1 hair at a time? How does this case differ from that of one who shaves his entire head 1 hair at a time, which is a fulfillment of his obligation? You can shave slowly, so as if it's like you're shaving 1 hair at a time. So here at the end, he came there were 2 hairs left. He shaved off one of them, then the other one fell off by itself. Why didn't he fulfill his obligation? So Ravina said to him, no, a resolution to Rava's dilemma is necessary in a case where one of the hairs fell out first and then he shaved the other one. So do we say that now, in any event, there is no measure of hair left on his head that requires shaving, as one remaining hair is not significant, and he has therefore fulfilled his obligation? Or perhaps we say that this is not considered shaving, as initially he left a significant amount, meaning 2 hairs, the minimum amount that we would call a significant amount. He left 2 hairs unshaved, and now when he shaves a second time, there's only 1 hair left because one of them fell out, and shaving 1 hair, that's not actually considered shaving, right? So what this Nazir would have to do to complete his Naziris is wait a few days, let some hair grow out long enough, and there's a minimum length so that we could call it shaving, and then shave his whole head again, and then he will have not only removed all the hair, but he will have performed the mitzvah of shaving his head at the completion of his period of Naziris. Now, Rava himself then resolves the dilemma. There is no hair here, and there is no shaving here. And the Gemara says, what do you mean? If there is no hair here, then there is shaving here, as no hair remains. And the Gemara explains that this is what Rava is saying. Even though there is no hair here, as only 1 hair remains, nevertheless, there is no mitzvah of shaving here, as he failed to shave it all on his first attempt. And the second time, he shaved less than the required amount. That's why he would have to wait till the hair grows back a bit and then shave again. New subject. The Gemara cites another dilemma raised by Rava. This has nothing to do with the robber returning what he stole when it's worth less than 1 peruta. It's just that we've introduced some dilemmas of Rava, so here's another one. Rava says, the sages said, Tractate Kalim, that with regard to a sealed earthenware barrel, that was punctured and was then sealed by sediments from its contents, the sediments have effectively saved the contents of the barrel from contracting ritual impurity, tuma, if the barrel were to come into contact with an impure item, as it is once again considered a sealed barrel. So in the notes, it's explained that what we're talking about here is an earthenware container that is in a house where a person dies. Right? So we've talked about before that there's corpse tuma and tuma of the roof, right? So meaning if a person dies inside a house, then everything that is in that house under the same roof, right? Under the same roof, I'm not sure about other rooms, but definitely if it's in the same room as the corpse, will become tamei, right? Will become impure. So if, for example, you had an earthenware jug filled with wine and its top was open, and then a person died in that room, so this jug of wine was under a roof with a dead human body, so that wine would become tamei. If it was teruma wine that was given to or was going to be given to a Kohen, to a priest, where the wine and the priest both have to be in a state of tahara, right? Both have to be in a state of ritual purity for the priest to be able to consume that wine. Well, now this wine is tamei, ritually impure. The priest cannot consume it, right? There's other limitations on what you can do with something that is tamei. Doesn't mean that, it has cooties or it's infectious or something like that. It's just ritually impure. However, the law states that the contents of an earthenware vessel that is sealed, right, closed, they do not contract tuma, even if they're under the same ceiling, under the same roof with a corpse, right? Mace tuma. So, if it was sealed, then the wine remains pure, tahor. So what happened here is that earthenware vessel was punctured. Okay, so now it's open. Even if it's a small hole, it's open, and then the wine would be exposed to that tuma and would become tamei. But what happened was the wine, which has dregs in it, and what that is the sediments of the yeast that cause the fermentation of the wine. And it could happen that, it doesn't really matter exactly what the physical manifestation of this, but in some way there was an earthenware jug, maybe it leaked, but then the sediment came and entered the hole where it was leaking and hardened, right? That yeast became hard as it came into contact with the air outside, and it actually sealed off the hole. And this happened before the person died in that same room. So Rav is saying, now is the earthenware jug considered sealed, even though it had an opening, but the opening became closed, not by the action of a person, but simply because the dregs of the wine, that sediment came and sealed the hole. So if it was not sealed by sediments and instead one plugged the hole with a vine, its content remains susceptible to contracting tuma until the owner smears clay around the uncovered parts of the hole. If there were two vines placed in the hole in order to plug it, its contents remain susceptible to contracting tuma until he smears clay from the sides of the hole inward and between one vine and the other, right? Because plugging it with something that doesn't make a perfect seal means that there is an opening in there, and that's why the wine would become tamei. Now, Rav Yemar explains the reason its contents become impervious to contracting ritual impurity is that he smeared clay over the uncovered sections of the hole. But if he did not smear clay over the uncovered sections, the contents would not be impervious to contracting ritual impurity. So why should this not be like the case in Rav's dilemma, where the sediments sealed the hole? And they sealed it, right? Not just went there, but sealed it. So, but let it be considered that when one plugs the hole with a vine, as though one had sealed half of the hole, since there is no apparent difference between a hole that is half sealed and a hole that is partially plugged with a vine. So accordingly, Rava should not have stated his dilemma, as it is clear from the Mishna that if the hole is only partially covered, the contents of the barrel are susceptible to contracting ritual impurity, but presumably if it's completely covered, they're not. So the sages say in response, how can these cases be compared? There, if he does not smear clay around the vine will not remain in place. By contrast, in a case where he sealed half of it with a substance that remains in place, as in Rava's dilemma, the seal remains in place and could be considered as a seal. So Rava's dilemma remains unresolved. Where's the law on this? An earthenware vessel that has been punctured and then sealed by the sediment of its contents is considered a sealed barrel and protects its contents from contracting ritual impurity, provided that it has a tightly sealed cover, etc. about the vine. Now, new dilemma by Rava, right? Another digression just because we're talking about Rava's dilemmas. And Rava says that the sages said that if one robbed another of leavened bread, of chametz, and Passover elapsed over it, and it is therefore prohibited to derive benefit from it, the robber may say to the victim, that which is yours is before you. So Rava raises a dilemma. Now we're on 105b. If the robber took a false oath concerning the robbery of the leavened bread, the chametz, what is the law? Do we say that since if it were to be stolen from the robber would need to pay the initial value of the bread, what it was worth when he stole it, to the robbery victim, as he can no longer say that which is yours is before you, and therefore he has denied a claim of a monetary matter to the robbery victim, and therefore he must pay the additional 1/5, the penalty, and he's liable to bring a guilt offering. Or perhaps we say that now, in any event, since this chametz is resting in the robber's possession, and it is considered as mere dust because no Jew can benefit from chametz that Pesach elapsed over it, since it is prohibited to derive benefit from it, and as such, when he denied stealing it, he made that denial over something that is worthless. And the laws concerning a false oath do not apply. He swore falsely, but the thing he swore falsely about is now worthless, so we actually don't engage the machinery of the false oath, the penalty, etc. And the Gemara comments, the matter that was a dilemma for Rava is actually obvious to Rabba, right? Rava says it's a dilemma. Rabba says, no, this is obvious. As Rabba says that in a scenario where one says to another, you stole my ox, and the other says, I did not steal it. So the first one says, well, what is the nature of its presence in your possession? You say that you didn't steal it. I say, there's my ox on your property. What's it doing here if you didn't steal it? And then the second person says, well, I didn't steal it. I am an unpaid bailee over it. I was asked to watch it. I didn't steal it. I was just asked to watch it for free. So if the defendant then takes a false oath to that effect, after which he later confesses that he stole the ox, he is liable to bring a guilt offering for denying a claim of a monetary matter. What do you mean a claim of a monetary matter? We're saying that if you swear a false oath over something, even though it's false, if the thing you're swearing to has no monetary component, isn't worth anything, then we're not going to add, the 1/5 penalty payment or the liability to bring a guilt offering. Now, he's saying, he's not denying that he stole it. He's claiming and making a false oath that he was asked to watch it for free. So what's the monetary matter? And Rabba says the monetary matter is that by swearing he's an unpaid bailee, which was false, he swore falsely, but what he swore to, would, if it were true, would have exempted himself from liability in cases of theft or loss. Because an unpaid bailee, someone that's watching your property as a favor to you, does not become liable if it's stolen from him or if he loses it, as opposed to a paid bailee who would be liable for those things. Now, if the one who has your ox and you're challenging him on it, what's it doing here? So he says, oh, I am a paid bailee over it. I got paid to watch it. Now you can start to see where the monetary matter is. So then he says, you're not a paid bailee. And he says, I swear I'm a paid bailee. and he's swearing falsely. So what is the underlying monetary matter that is going to therefore engage the machinery, which would make him liable to the extra fifth, the guilt offering, etc.? He says, I'm a paid bailee over it, and he takes a false oath to that effect. And then later he regrets it, and he confesses that he stole the ox. So he is liable to bring a guilt offering for denying a claim of a monetary matter. And what was the monetary matter that he swore falsely to? Well, he exempted himself from liability in cases of breakage and death, right? Because those are things that a paid bailee would not be liable for when something is in their possession. So if he responds instead, no, I didn't steal it, I borrowed it, and he takes a false oath to that effect, after which he later confesses that he stole the ox, then he's liable to bring a guilt offering for denying a claim of a monetary matter. What is the monetary matter? Well, if it were true that he borrowed it, he would have exempted himself from liability in cases where the ox died due to ordinary labor, which one who borrows would not be liable for. So there was something that in his claim would have been, something that had a monetary component. He lied, and so since he lied with respect to a monetary matter, he becomes liable to bring the guilt offering when he later admits that he actually stole it. Now, in all of these cases, the ox is in the possession of the one who took the false oath, and he admits that it belongs to the other. Right? In other words, he's not swearing that he didn't steal it. What he's saying, he's not swearing that he's not a robber. What he says is, I swear that I'm a paid bailee, or I swear that I borrowed it. Now, that's a false oath, but it's a different false oath than I swear that I didn't rob you of it. Right? That's a different oath, and it has different consequences. So in all of these cases, the ox is in the possession of one who took the false oath, and he admits that it belongs to another person, paid bailee, unpaid bailee, borrower. He admits that it belongs to someone else, namely the one who's challenging him. So the Gemara analyzes Rabba's statement. So apparently Rabba holds that even though the ox still exists and it can be returned to its owner, since if it were to be stolen, the robber would be found to be denying a claim of a monetary matter, as according to his claim, he would then be exempt from paying. He is now considered to be denying a claim of a monetary matter as well. So here in the case of the bread, over which Pesach elapsed, also, even though it is considered mere dust, as if it doesn't exist anymore since no Jew can benefit from it, since if it were to be stolen, he would be required to pay the robbery victim full-fledged monetary restitution, namely what the chametz was worth at the time that he stole it before Passover. Now, too, he is considered to be denying a claim of a monetary matter, since, right, if it was stolen from him, if it didn't exist anymore, he'd owe money. Only because it exists is he able to return and say that which is yours is before you. So Rava sat and said this halacha, this law, that one who protected himself from potential liability for payment by taking a false oath that he is a bailee is liable to pay the additional fifth and bring a guilt offering. Rav Amram raised an objection to Rava from a baraisa. The verse states concerning one who is liable for taking a false oath concerning a monetary matter, quote, and deals falsely with it, Leviticus 5:22. And this serves to exclude one who admits to the primary feature of a claim, right? The primary feature is he's not saying, I swear that I didn't steal. He's saying, I swear that this is your ox. I agree with you. It is your ox. But I am a bailee of it, or I am a borrower of it. So he's admitting the primary feature that he's not the owner of it. And so maybe for that reason, we're not going to engage the fifth and the liability to bring a guilt offering, etc. Right, so here's a note from Rav Steinsaltz. In general, a robber would be liable to bring an offering for taking a false oath concerning a deposit if he attempted to keep the animal in his possession by taking the oath. In other words, somebody was asked to watch it as an unpaid bailee or as a paid bailee, or he was a borrower. And then later, he didn't want to return the animal. They said, why don't you want to return it? Because it's mine. What do you mean it's yours? Somebody lent it to you. No, it was always mine. And he swears falsely that it was his animal. And then later he regrets and he's going to return it. So now he has to pay the fifth, bring an offering, etc. This is different than the robber. This is one, but related, very closely related. One is the robber. One is, in fact, it's the same because the Torah equates these. One who robs and then swears falsely that he robbed, or one who receives a deposit and then swears falsely that he received it as a deposit. In both cases, he has to return what he took or its monetary value, add a fifth, and he's liable to bring a guilt offering. It's the robber, though, who has to pursue the person all the way to where he is, because initially when he received it, that was a sin, whereas initially when the bailee received it, he did nothing wrong. Later, when he swore falsely, that's when he did something wrong. Now, the Baraisa continues. So how is this so? In a scenario where one says to another, you stole my ox, and the latter says, I did not steal it, right? That's the direct false oath regarding stealing. So the first asks, what is the nature of my ox's presence on your property or in your possession? So the second one responds with any of the following replies. You sold it to me, or you gave it to me as a gift, or your father sold it to me, or your father gave it to me as a gift, or it chased after my cow and entered my domain, or it came to me on its own, or I found it straying on the road and I brought it home, or I am an unpaid bailee over it, or I'm a paid bailee over it, or I'm a borrower of it. And the second one takes a false oath to that effect, and then later he admits that he took a false oath, so one might have thought that he should be liable. And the verse states, and deals falsely with it, which serves to exclude one who admits to the primary feature of a claim. He stole it. Later, he admits, it's not mine. I borrowed it. I was asked to watch it. Your father gave it to me. Any one of those things is a lie, but he is admitting that it's not his. So Rava said to him, fool. Rava is not very patient with Rav Amram. Rava says to him, fool. When that baraisa that you just cited is taught, it is referring to a case where the robber said to the owner, here you are, and presented the ox to him immediately so that he did not profit by claiming that he was a bailee. He returned it. When I spoke, says Rava, I was referring to a case where the ox was standing in a different place, such as a swamp, and was not returned to the owner, right? The owner comes and says, give me my ox, and the guy swears falsely, well, I was asked to watch your ox, or your father lent me your ox, or whatever, any of those stories, not I stole it, something else. He admits that the ox wasn't his, but he's not returning the ox either. The ox is somewhere else. Now, several examples of an oath in which the robber admits to the primary feature of a claim, that it's not his, were cited in that baraisa above. And the Gemara analyzes some of these examples. When the robber says, you sold the ox to me, he has asserted that it belongs to him. So what admission to the primary feature of the claim is there? If he says, you sold it to me, he's claiming it's his ox. So he's not admitting that the ox now belongs to the robbery victim. And the Gemara explains, no, it is necessary to teach this in a case where he said to him, you sold the animal to me, but I did not give you the money, so take your ox and go. It's that nature of a deceitful person. So when the robber says, you gave it to me, or your father gave it to me, he has asserted that it belongs to him. So what admission to the primary feature of the claim is there? And the Gemara explains it is a case where he said to them, it was given to me on the condition that I will afford you satisfaction, and I did not do anything for you, so take your ox and go. And when the robber says, I found it straying on the road and I brought it home, let the owner say to him, well, you should have returned it to me. Shmuel's father said, the Bryce is referring to a case in which he says, I take a note that I found the ox as a lost item and I did not know that it was yours so that I could return it to you. Right, so in all these cases, the guy's lying, the robbery victim is going to get his ox back, but the question is do we engage the machinery of a robber stole, swore falsely that he didn't steal, then admits it, So he has to pay the extra fifth and bring a guilt offering and pursue the robbery victim wherever he may be in order to give back the property that he stole. And these cases muddy the waters. New subject. After discussing a false oath taken by a robber in which he admits to the primary feature of a claim that it's not his, the Gemara discusses a false oath taken not by the robber, but rather by the witnesses. It is taught in a baraisa, when a witness takes an oath that he has no knowledge of the status of a lost item, Ben Azai says that there are three possible false oaths, i.e., the oath may be false for one of three reasons. The witnesses may have recognized the lost item, but did not recognize its finder, or he may have recognized its finder, but did not recognize the item, or he may have recognized neither the item nor its finder. So in each of these cases, the witness took a false oath that he had no knowledge of the lost item, when in fact he had limited knowledge of it. And the Gemara asks, in the third case cited above, where he claimed that he recognized neither the item nor the person who found it. So in that case, he took his oath in truth when he claimed that he did not have knowledge of the lost item. Why is this cited as an example of a false oath? And the Gemara amends the Baraisa, say that the reference here is to a case where he recognized both the item and its finder. He claimed he didn't recognize. In the other cases, he actually didn't recognize the item, or he actually didn't recognize the finder, but he did understand the other. And the third case is where he recognized both the item and the finder, but he claimed he didn't. Now the Gemara asks, for which law did Ben Azai cite these examples? So Rav Ami says that Rabbi Hanina says they were cited to teach that there is exemption in these cases from bringing an offering for taking a false oath of testimony, right? A witness who took a false oath for testifying. And Shmuel says that these examples were cited to teach that the witness incurs liability to bring an offering in these cases. And the Gemara comments, and Rav Ami and Shmuel disagree with regard to the issue that is the subject of the dispute between these Tanaim, these sages of the Mishnah, as it is taught in a baraisa. So with regard to one who administers an oath to a single witness, and the witness takes a false oath that he has no awareness of the monetary matter at hand, the witness is exempt from bringing a sin offering. Why? Because the testimony of a single witness is meaningless. We don't establish any legal matter by the testimony of a single witness. If two witnesses were there and their testimony agrees, even though one of them might have been truthful, but the other one is proven to be false, well, that false testimony would have created liability for the defendant in the case. When we show that the witness was actually knowingly swearing falsely, that is when his liability will kick in, and he'll have to bring an offering to atone for giving false testimony. And the Gemara comments, and Rav Ami and Shmuel disagree with regard as there is no awareness of the monetary matter at hand, and the witness is exempt from bringing a sin offering. And Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, deems the witness liable to bring a sin offering, even in the case of a single witness. And the Gemara asks, with regard to what do they disagree? So one sage, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, holds that an item that causes financial loss is considered to have monetary value. Similarly, the potential monetary benefit that the witness can generate by causing the defendant to admit to the debt and pay the owner, even though he's only a single witness, we can't establish that the defendant owes money, but because there was a single witness, the defendant himself might then confess and pay. Therefore, the witness is considered to have taken a false oath with regard to a monetary matter. And the other sage, the first Tana, holds that an item that causes financial loss is not itself considered to have monetary value. Similarly, the potential monetary benefit that the witness can generate by causing the defendant to admit to the debt and pay the owner, this is not considered to have its own monetary value, and therefore the witness is not considered to have taken a false oath with regard to a monetary matter, which is the requirement in order to become liable to bring the sin offering. Now, the Gemara, new subject, discusses the law concerning a bailee, right, one who is watching property for someone else, who denies having a deposit in his possession. I ask you to watch some property of mine, for some time. A few years go by, I come back, I say, okay, I'd like to get my car back. You say, what car? There is no car. I'm like, I know I left the car with you. You deny it. Then what? What is the law concerning a bailee who denies having a deposit in his possession? Rav Sheshes says a bailee who falsely denies a claim concerning a deposit becomes as a robber with regard to it, because he's keeping it for himself if he denies he received it as a deposit, and he is therefore liable to pay even for damage that is the result of accidents. And the Gemara notes that the Tana also taught this law in a Baraisa. The verse states, and deal falsely with it, Leviticus 5:22 through 24, and we learn from this verse the punishment for one who denies having a deposit. From where is the prohibition itself derived? The verse states, neither shall you deal falsely, Leviticus 19:11. So the Gemara explains, what is the Baraisa not referring to? The punishment of having to pay money due to his denial, even for accidental damage, in accordance with the statement of Rav Sheshes? And the Gemara rejects this. No, the Baraisa is referring to the punishment for taking a false oath. It's not that you're trying to get yourself out of liability. It's that you become liable to bring an offering. There's punishment simply because you swore falsely. But also the additional 1/5 payment and the bringing of the offering kicks in when you swear falsely. So the Gemara challenges, from the fact that the latter clause of the Baraisa teaches a case where he took an oath, it may be inferred that the first clause teaches a case where he did not take an oath. And the punishment referred to by the Baraisa is the imposition of liability for accidental damage, right? When you're in these different levels of being a custodian, being a paid bailee or an unpaid bailee, at a certain level, you're liable for accidental damage. He might have tried to get out of that with his false oath. So as the latter clause teaches that the verse states, and swear to a lie, Leviticus 5:22. And we learn from this that there is a punishment for taking a false oath. From where is the prohibition itself derived? The verse states, nor lie, at Leviticus 19:11. And from the fact that the latter clause teaches the law where he took an oath, the first clause must be teaching the law in a case where he did not take an oath. So the Gemara answers, the sages say in response that both this clause and that clause are referring to a case where he did take an oath, but here in the latter clause, it is where the bailee admitted his false oath, while there in the first clause, it is where witnesses came and testified that the deposit was in his possession contrary to his false oath. Now, where witnesses came, he is liable only for damage that is a result of accidents, and where he admitted his false oath, he is obligated to pay for the principal and an additional 1/5 payment, and to bring a guilt offering. Now you might say, well, are you saying that the guy who admits his false oath is in worse, ends up with worse consequences than the guy who gets caught? Yes, because the guy who admits it is going to pay his fifth, and he's going to bring his guilt offering, and then his conscience is clear. Not just his emotional conscience, but his account in heaven, as it were, is squared away because he made the atonement for his theft and false oath, or for receiving a deposit and then making a false oath about it. The one who gets caught swearing falsely, okay, he has to make restitution, but if he doesn't pay the fifth and bring a guilt offering, etc., he remains guilty of his sin, and he'll be held to account for it when he goes to the next world, or sometimes even in this world. Okay, after dismissing the attempted proof for Rav Sheshes' statement that a bailee who denies possession of a deposit is considered a robber, even without having taken a false oath, the Gemara now attempts to disprove the statement itself. And Rami Bar Kamma raises an objection to Rav Sheshes' statement. Though it is usually the defendant who is required to take an oath in order to avoid having to pay a claim, when it's just one person's word versus another, you could say, pay me, you owe me, and the guy is willing to swear an oath in court that he doesn't owe, he's going to get out of having to pay. But he's taking on, if these are pious people, he's not going to be so quick to swear a false oath. So now the Mishnah in Tractate Shavuos, right, about the laws of oaths, lists these cases. And one such case is where the plaintiff's opponent, i.e. the defendant, is suspect with regard to an oath, i.e. there is reason for the court to believe that this person would swear a false oath. Now, how would the defendant have become suspect? It would be by having taken a false oath with regard to an oath of testimony or an oath of deposit, or even for an oath taken in vain, right? It was proven in the past that this person swears falsely. So the Gemara comments, since the Mishnah states that he becomes suspect only as a result of having taken a false oath, it can be inferred that he does not become suspect by virtue of denial of a claim alone. And if it is so that a bailee who denies having taken the deposit is considered a robber, even without having taken an oath, then it is with his denial that he ought to be disqualified, as a robber does not have the credibility to take an oath. And the sages say in defense of Rav Shesh's opinion, with what are we dealing here? In the case of the Mishnah in Shavuos, we are dealing with a case where the deposit stands in a place not in the bailee's possession, like for example a swamp. As in this case, his statement is not considered a complete denial, because he thinks to himself, I will evade the owner by claiming that I never took the deposit until I go and bring it to him. He's just stalling for time. Therefore, he is not considered to be a robber. By contrast, Rav Sheshes is referring to a case where the bailee denied responsibility for the item while it was in his possession, as he intended to keep it for himself. Higher level of dishonesty. So the Gemara adds, know that one who denies possession of an item only so that he may later return it, he's not considered a robber. As Rav Idi Bar Avin says, one who denies a claim concerning having taken a loan is fit to bear witness. But one who denies a claim concerning having taken a deposit is disqualified from bearing witness, because if it is clear that the deposit is in his possession, yet he denies it, he must be a liar, and we're not going to take his testimony as a witness. I'm almost done, so if you got questions or comments, please get them in. We're just going to take a little bit of a head start on page 106, because it's a long one, and we're going to have that at lunchtime tomorrow. Now, the Gemara raises further difficulty with regard to Rav Shesh's opinion, but didn't Ilfa say that an oath affects acquisition, meaning that once he testified falsely that he did not become a bailee, the item in question becomes his property, rendering him liable as a robber, even for damage or loss resulting from accidents. And the Gemara infers it is the taking of an oath that affects acquisition, but mere denial of having become a bailee does not affect acquisition. And the Gemara rejects this distinction. Here too, Ilfa must be referring to a case where the deposit stands in a place that is not in the bailee's possession, for example, a swamp. And as long as he does not take an oath, it can be assumed that his intention is simply to be evasive. But if the animal was standing in his house, then he acquires it as soon as he denies the claim. Acquires meaning it's in his possession and he's lying about it. So we're going to, now he becomes liable for the extra fifth, to bring a guilt offering, etc. And if you wish, say instead, what is the meaning of Ilfa's statement that an oath affects acquisition? It is in accordance with the statement of Rav Huna, as Rav Huna says that Rav said that if one party says, I have 100 dinars in your possession, the other party says, you do not have any money in my possession, and the latter took an oath to that effect, and later witnesses came and testified that his oath was false, he is exempt. As it is stated, the oath of the Lord shall be between them both to see whether he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods, and the owner thereof shall accept it, and he shall not make restitution. Exodus 22:10. Teaching that once the owner received an oath, the one who took the oath no longer pays monetary restitution. So Ilfa's statement that an oath affects acquisition means that the bailee will no longer have to pay monetary restitution, as it does not relate to Rav Shesh's statement that the bailee becomes responsible for damage resulting from accidents as soon as he denies the claim. Now, that's really very interesting. The Torah says, two people are saying, you took it, I didn't take it, you took it, I didn't take it. So they go to court, and the one who claims he didn't take it swears, I didn't take it. Now the Torah says at that point, it's over. The litigation is over. The guy swore. Now then witnesses come and say, he did take it, right? Now he's not liable anymore as a robber because the case ended. Now, you might say the court should extract that property now that it's been proven that he was a liar. But what's really going to happen is that this guy is going to bear his sin, and the court won't have the power to extract it. On Judgment Day, that person will pay a price. And also, now that the witnesses have come, perhaps he will repent, because certainly his reputation is in tatters. Right? But there's a limit to how far, litigation is going to go. There's a limit to how far a court is going to interfere with the affairs of people. And that's maybe something to be learned from, that there's a limit to how litigious a society should be. Okay, 3 comments. Rebecca, but if the robber wouldn't be able to sell the chametz, not owning it, so it would follow under the nullification, right? I mean, nullified, yes. So it's like he can't sell it, no. But it's interesting that because it is the actual object that he stole, he can say to the robbery victim, that which is yours is before you. It's kind of a weird, I wouldn't call it a loophole, but it's a weird feature of the law that since what he stole still exists, he can return it. If it no longer exists, then he has to pay the money of what it was worth at the time that he stole it, which is worth much more than chametz, that Pesach elapsed over it while it was in the possession of a Jew, which becomes prohibited not only for eating, but for any benefit for all Jews. Ifa, is there a penalty for the Jewish robber who stole leavened bread and owned it over Pesach before returning it? I mean, is there a penalty for owning leavened bread through Pesach? Not a court-imposed penalty, but it is it's an avera, right? It's a transgression that you have violated a prohibition, and a strong prohibition. So to make an atonement for that, if the temple were standing, you would bring an offering. Now that we live, sadly, for 2,000 years in the absence of the temple, this is why, even if we did it by mistake, we owned some leavened bread, like we forgot, we didn't remove it from a cupboard, there were some crumbs, left from a snack you had in one of the bedrooms, etc. This is why we do our best to remove everything from the house, and then we say anything that I might have missed, I hereby nullify it. It is not mine. It is not in my possession. It is ownerless, right? And that is what gets you off the hook. If you did it on purpose, or you didn't care, a person just didn't care. I'm not a religious person, whatever, so that's just a Jew who is choosing to, transgress, to violate that Torah law. Okay, so he's carrying his transgression with him. Rebecca, regarding earthenware vessels, sounds like the question is whether or not it leaks. Yeah, pretty much. And that's, but really what we're saying is, since the Torah says anything that's in an earthenware vessel will become tamei, if it's under the same roof of the corpse, but it says in an unsealed, right? So if it's sealed, it's tahor. If it's unsealed, like you say, if it leaks, then it becomes tamei, whatever was in there. So there you go. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Have a great night.